The goal of this video is to discuss harsh vocal techniques and how to get started with doing them. I'm essentially going over the way I learned how to do harsh vocals, so there are probably other methods to get there, but this is the way that I know how to do it. There are essentially two classes of vocals, inhales and exhales, and I will show both even though I don't use all of them in my own music, and I'm not particularly good at doing most of them aside from the ones that I do use, which are the regular exhales. Before we get into that though, let's first break down what speech actually is. When you breathe, you're moving air from the lungs through the larynx and out the mouth. It's a relatively quiet action, even if you're breathing hard. When you speak, you're activating a part of the larynx called the glottis, which is your vocal cords essentially. It's a pair of folds that constricts the passage of air and causes sound to resonate through your oral cavity and amplifying the volume of it. Your mouth then shapes the wave into distinct sounds and controls other things like pitch, and for this reason, combined, speaking is much louder than breathing. Now, if you constrict your glottis very tightly, you produce an effect called the vocal fry. Let me lean into my mic to demonstrate because it's not very loud.
It sounds a little something like this.
The vocal fry is essentially what creates harsh vocal effects. It's just a matter of amplifying it by forcing more air out of the lungs and shaping the pitch using your mouth. That gives you the standard high-pitch exhales, a shrieking style very typical of black metal. Vocal fry with an exhale and an open mouth creates a high-pitch technique. It's extremely flexible. You can take it from mid-range, higher, all the way up to something like emperor range. I prefer somewhere around the mid-range, although I occasionally go higher. It's not anything that I make a conscious decision about. I just record however it comes out. If you decide to go low instead of high, then you get your death growl. It's actually the same exact vocal fry technique, but you close your mouth to keep the high pitches in and allow the low pitches to come out. Again, you can shape your mouth to produce whatever sound you want. There's no way to not look like an idiot doing this. I personally rarely do growls except to accentuate certain lyrics or to add a certain aesthetic. I actually don't think I do them very well, which is the main reason I don't use them too much. Now, for the story of how I initially learned to do harsh vocals, there were two methods that I learned. The first is the whistling method, where you lower a whistle until you naturally hit a vocal fry. The second is to hum and do the same thing if you can't whistle. So both methods will lead you into a death growl. Of course, you have to build up your ability to do it with practice. Obviously, if you don't use the right technique or you go too hard at first, you'll end up hurting yourself. Initially, I would practice probably for a couple of minutes, and then I'd wait a day and try again because it hurt too much. Once I developed control over the vocal fry, I gradually moved up in range until I found the sound that I wanted. When I got around to recording the demo, I had the ability to do about one song at a time, maybe 2 or 3 takes, so about 20 minutes in total, and I have to stop. By the time I got to recording Rebirth, I actually developed a slightly different technique where I pulled my jaw out and back, which actually allowed me to record the entire album in a single 1-hour session. Since then, I've modified the technique a little bit more. I don't really practice much anymore, but you do build it up over time. For reference, I did all of the vocals to return in 2 sessions, which were 1 week apart, about 2 hours long each, and that ended up being an hour-long album, so I'd say pretty good for not having practiced like 6 months prior. Now onto inhales. As far as the technique goes for producing inhaled vocals, it's actually pretty much identical to the exhales, with the difference, of course, being that you breathe in. It's the same tightening of the glottis, only the intake of air causes the vibrations. And just like exhales, you can go low or high to produce 2 types of sounds. Inhales are how you get your pig squeals, of course, and going low gives you something like this. Now obviously not very loud, which is why I actually have to lean in closer to my microphone. I don't particularly like the way it sounds. It's obviously too false, and I actually find them to be pretty easy to do. I can probably sit here and do this for hours. However, I actually quite like the way that high inhales sound. I believe that this is the Alsace technique. It's the only way that I've been able to get anything close to what Nige is doing. I've heard similar styles come up in other bands. For instance, Aglock's Unlike the Waves from Ashes Against the Grain, there's a section where I think he's also doing inhales. What I like about this is the ability to do harsh vocals but still have somewhat of a layer of harmonic overtones. So I'm working on perfecting my technique with this. Unlike the lows, this can be really painful, and I know when I started trying them, I couldn't do it for longer than a second without coughing my lungs out. I actually found out that you can build up to it by starting with low pig squeals and working your way up, like shifting gears. So I do use the low inhales for the purpose of warming up to the high ones. And that's pretty much all the basics. There are other hybrid styles like Lemmy's original harsh vocals, to the Venom and Slayer style shouting, which I find hurts way more for me than to do full-on harsh vocals. But it's probably just a practice thing. My advice really is to work hard. Unlike cleans, which you kind of have to be born with, like Bruce Dickinson or Rob Halford, anyone can learn how to do harsh vocals and do them extremely well as long as you put the work into it. Aside from aesthetics, I think this is why they're so prevalent in metal, because tons of bands are fronted by guitarists who learn to sing out of necessity, and harsh vocals do accentuate guitar parts by not overshadowing the harmonies with melodic vocals. But that's pretty much all I've got to cover. Again, this is just my way of doing it. Not saying I'm a pro at most of these vocal techniques. I kind of suck at most of them, but I'm practicing because I do want to get better, and perhaps when I do get better, you'll hear more of them along the way.